quickly turned into something no one expected, a game of appearances, hidden feelings, and a love neither of them were prepared for. What happens when pretending becomes too real to ignore? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your like helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing more emotional stories like this one. Share it with someone special. The marble floors of the Astoria Manhattan gleamed under the morning sun, streaming through the grand arched windows like melted glass. The lobby was a portrait of luxury, chandeliers dripping crystals, messengers in impeccable uniforms, and the soft murmur of money exchanging hands at every glance. Amidst this pristine scene, a whirlwind of chaos arrived. Emma Reynolds. She burst through the revolving door with a grunt, dragging a suitcase whose broken wheels screeched with every turn. Her cheeks were flushed, curls unruly around her reddened face. A week of rejections and stress clung to her skin like heat. As she reached the center of the lobby, the suitcase protested one last time, and then exploded, scattering its contents like confetti across the marble floor. Out tumbled a tattered apron with a saffron stain, a cracked jar of saffron threads, a chocolate-smeared recipe notebook, and, of course, a glass jar of homemade raspberry jam, which rolled dramatically before shattering against a column. Emma fell to her knees, heart racing. "No, no, no, please," she whispered, trying to clean the sticky mess with the sleeve of her sweater. She felt the eyes on her, tourists halting mid-check-in, concierge staff whispering subtly behind the desk. Her life was unraveling in the most glamorous zip code in Manhattan, and then impact. A strong jolt hit her right shoulder as someone collided with her from behind. Papers floated in the air, and two bodies stumbled into each other before they found their balance. "Oh God, are you all right?" asked a low, urgent voice laced with panic. Emma blinked and looked up into a pair of ocean-deep eyes, on a face that could have belonged on the cover of Business Insider. His suit screamed money, his cologne whispered dominance, but his expression? Pure desperation. I think so," she managed, dazed. He crouched down beside her, ignoring the mess. "I'm so sorry for this, truly. But I don't have time to explain. Trust me. I'll pay you $5,000. Right now." Emma stared at him. "For what?" "Pretend to be my girlfriend. Just for 3 minutes." She blinked again. "What?" He gestured, as subtly as possible, toward a tall woman standing near the reception desk. Immaculate emerald suit, heels like weapons, an aura of power so strong it seemed to distort the space around her. "That's Victoria Langford, my ex's mother. She's also my investor, and she's here because she thinks I'm still pining for her daughter. I told her I've moved on, with someone else. She insisted on meeting her. I didn't expect her to show up today." Emma followed his gaze, still trying to understand how this involved her. "And you want me to pretend to be that someone?" He nodded, eyes pleading. "Just 3 minutes, I swear. You'd be doing me a huge favor. I'll transfer the money as soon as we leave." Her brain couldn't process fast enough. It had to be a scam, or a prank, or some rich guy's bizarre joke. But then she thought of her last $20, the eviction notice on her apartment door, and the rejection email from the only restaurant she had dreamed of working at since culinary school. "What's your name?" she asked, still out of breath. Alexander Hart." She hesitated, her eyes flicking back to the emerald-clad woman who was now staring at them with laser-like focus. The air in the lobby grew thicker. "All right," Emma said, standing up. "But if she finds out we're both going down together?" A flash of relief crossed his face. He shrugged off his coat and gently draped it over her shoulders, like a familiar gesture. "You're amazing." He took her hand, warm and firm, and together they walked toward Victoria Langford. Emma's heart beat so loudly in her chest it felt like a drumline. Each step echoed with the absurdity of the moment. "Victoria," Alexander greeted, his voice smooth and velvety. "Sorry to keep you waiting. This is Emma, my fiancée." Emma held her breath. Fiancée? That wasn't part of the deal. Victoria's expression didn't change. Her sharp, assessing eyes scanned Emma from head to toe, lingering on the mismatched shoes, the raspberry stain on the sleeve, and the smudged mascara under her eyes. "Well," Victoria said finally, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. This is unexpected. Emma swallowed. Her palm was sweaty inside Alexander's, but she squeezed it gently, trying to play the part. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Langford, she said, forcing her most polite tone. Victoria tilted her head, raising an impeccably groomed eyebrow. And what, if I may ask, does Emma do? I'm a chef, Emma said quickly. Or, I'm trying to be. She's brilliant, Alexander added, his voice softer. She has a way of making you taste things you didn't even know you missed. Emma blinked. That wasn't part of the script. Her eyes turned to him, but he was still staring at Victoria. Victoria nodded slowly, her eyes clearly rolling. Then perhaps you two would honor us with dinner tonight. At my house. A more relaxed setting. Alexander hesitated. Emma felt the tension running down his arm. We'd love to, she said before he could speak. He looked at her, surprised. She nodded slightly, and her eyes said, I've got this. Victoria's smile sharpened like the edge of a knife. Wonderful. I'll have someone send you the details. With that, she turned on her heel and disappeared behind a marble column, followed by her entourage like shadows. Emma exhaled for the first time in hours. Alexander turned to her. You didn't have to say yes. Emma shrugged, her heart still pounding. $5,000 doesn't seem like enough to deal with that woman more than once. He laughed, really laughed, and the sound was unexpectedly warm. Let's go, he said. We've got a dinner to fake, and a love story to invent. But as they walked out into the Manhattan sunlight, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just in her day or in her luck, something deeper, something dangerous. And whatever it was just getting started. The ride in the black car into downtown should have been silent, but the space between Emma and Alexander pulsed with an invisible energy. Outside, Manhattan passed by indistinctly. Taxis honking, sidewalk cafes, businessmen shouting on the phone. But inside the car, there was only the echo of what had just happened. Emma stared out the window, her fingers still gripping the hem of Alexander's coat, which hung over her knees. It smelled faintly of cedar and citrus, a scent that seemed to follow him like a signature. Her mind struggled to comprehend the situation, but nothing seemed real. She had just agreed to pretend to be a man's fiancé, whom she had met 5 minutes ago, and now they were on their way to dinner with the most intimidating woman in New York. You didn't have to agree to dinner, Alexander said calmly, breaking the silence. She looked at him. You didn't correct the fiancé part. Touch. He gave a small smile. I panicked. You were already doing me a favor. Didn't think we'd get this far. Emma let out a breathy laugh, half amused, half terrified. Well, now we're in this, so we'd better be convincing. Alexander leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Agreed. We can't get caught. Victoria doesn't just want proof. She wants emotional evidence. Emma raised an eyebrow. You mean, we have to look like we're in love? He nodded, and the weight of that sentence hung in the air like a challenge. Minutes later, they arrived at his apartment in Tribeca, an elegant, modern space in a tall building, with floor-to-ceiling windows and furniture too sleek to sit on without feeling like a guest. It didn't surprise her. Everything about him exuded refined success. He threw the keys onto a tray and gestured toward the leather sofa. We have a few hours before dinner. Let's build our story. Emma dropped her purse beside the sofa and crossed her arms. All right. Where did we meet? Alexander sat beside her, leaning in more than necessary. Union Square Green Market? She blinked. You're kidding. He smiled. No. You were buying tomatoes. I was buying basil. I grabbed the last bunch, you grabbed it first, and I challenged you to a cook-off. That's ridiculous. That's memorable. She had no way to argue. All right. Did we do the cook-off at your house? He nodded. I burned the risotto. You made a lemon-thyme chicken that ruined all the other chicken for me. And then? You fell hopelessly in love with me during dinner? I'm a romantic at heart. Emma rolled her eyes, but a reluctant smile tugged at her lips. All right. First fight? Over-organizing, he said without hesitation. She stared at him. Seriously? I'm obsessed with alphabetical order. God, you're worse than me. They laughed, and just like that, the tension started to ease. For a few moments, it felt like they weren't pretending. In the next hour, they built their fantasy life, detail by detail, favorite inside jokes. The trip to Vermont that never happened. The night she supposedly cried while watching a dog food commercial. The song they danced to in his kitchen. But somewhere between your bad habit is leaving socks everywhere and he refuses to watch horror movies, the lines began to blur. Emma found herself studying the way his eyes softened when he smiled, the slight rasp in his voice when he got serious, the way his fingers fiddled with his watch when he wasn't speaking. And Alexander. He kept looking at her as if he was trying to figure something out, like there was more behind her sharp intelligence and stained apron than met the eye. As the late afternoon sun set on the horizon, Alexander stood up. Time for the hard part. She raised an eyebrow. The interrogation dinner? He shook his head. The transformation. He disappeared down the hallway and returned moments later with a bag of clothes. Inside this, he said, is your new identity. Emma unzipped the bag and revealed a deep blue long dress with delicate beaded embroidery on the shoulders. Simple, elegant, and undeniably expensive. She sucked in a breath. I can't wear this, she said, her voice low. You need to, he replied gently. Victoria is trained to spot weaknesses. Every detail matters. A team of stylists arrived in less than an hour, makeup artists, a hairstylist, and even someone with a tray of jewelry options. Emma sat silently on a high stool, letting them transform her, strand by strand. Her curls were tamed into soft waves, her face highlighted with neutral tones that accentuated the green in her eyes. Her nails were filed, shaped, and painted. It was a strange feeling, looking in the mirror and seeing someone she barely recognized. A woman who looked elegant, poised, worthy of a man like Alexander. When she slipped into the dress and put on the heels, the room went silent. Alexander, standing by the window, turned and for a moment said nothing. His eyes slowly scanned her, his expression unreadable. Emma tugged at the hem, embarrassed. Too much? He blinked and cleared his throat. No, it's perfect. She looked at him, expecting a sarcastic comment, some recap of their earlier joke. But his gaze was different now, intense, almost reverent. It's not just the dress, he murmured. Emma felt the air shift, like something unsaid had taken root between them. The moment passed quickly. He looked away. She adjusted her hair, and the illusion returned. But a small spark of something real glimmered under the game. Outside, the car waited to take them to the Langford mansion. Emma gave one last look in the mirror and turned to Alexander. Ready to convince the world we're in love? He offered his arm. Let's break some hearts. But neither of them realized how much truth would go unnoticed, or how hard it would be to separate performance from feeling, especially after dinner began. The car glided past rows of brownstone houses and entered the most majestic part of the Upper East Side. Emma sat with her hands tightly clasped in her lap, still recovering from the transformation. The dress felt like a costume borrowed from another woman's life. But Alexander, confident and serene in his tuxedo, seemed completely at ease, as if this world had always belonged to him. Final preparations? He asked, looking at her with a reassuring half-smile. Emma took a deep breath, trembling. Yes, let's go over it again. They spoke in soft tones, as if rehearsing for a Broadway debut. Where they met, what they cooked on their first date, the story of a rainy afternoon playing Scrabble, and debating whether "za" was a real word. They'd invented an entire relationship in less than a day, stitching it together with threads of imagination, sarcasm, and fragments of their own truths. But with every detail added, something strange happened. The made-up story started to feel familiar. The way she teased him for being overly methodical in the kitchen, the way he smiled when hearing about her obsession with lavender shortbread cookies. Everything seemed strangely possible, like a version of reality that could have been. You're really good at this, Alexander said suddenly. Like, eerily good. Emma raised an eyebrow. What? Pretending to be someone I'm not? No, making it feel real. He paused. You're not just acting. You're connecting. She shrugged. Maybe that's just called listening. He turned his gaze away for a moment, his jaw tightening slightly. You'd be surprised how many people in my world don't do that. The car pulled up in front of the Langford mansion, a 5-story limestone facade bathed in golden lights with a silence that screamed power. The driver opened the door and Alexander stepped out first. Then he turned, extended his hand, and helped Emma out as if she were made of glass. Their hands didn't separate as they climbed the steps. Inside, the foyer was a museum of wealth, oil paintings, marble busts, fresh orchids in crystal vases. The guests, elegantly dressed investors, wealthy aristocrats and all the Langford lineage, were already sipping champagne. Conversations flowed in soft, rehearsed tones. No one raised their voice. No one let their smile slip. Emma gripped her purse tighter. Victoria Langford approached, her gaze penetrating. "At the right time," she said, moving her gaze between them. "Emma, darling, I hope you've developed an appetite. We're serving venison tonight." Emma smiled. "I've never turned down a game." Alexander hid a smile behind his wine glass. They were led to the dining room, a long mahogany table set for 20, with enough silverware to make Emma hesitate. Alexander subtly pointed to the right fork, and she quickly understood. He didn't move closer, didn't correct, he simply supported. It was strange how they moved in sync so quickly. Clarissa Langford was seated ahead of them, composed and calm. Alexander's ex-fiancée. Her hair was styled in an updo, her dress shimmering like champagne. But her expression wasn't what Emma had expected, neither bitter nor condescending. Kind of. "So," Clarissa said, joining her hands, "you two seem happy." Emma exchanged a glance with Alexander, who replied gently, "We are." "And how long have you been together?" Victoria interrupted. "Almost 8 months," Alexander replied without missing a beat. "Funny," Victoria mused. "You never mentioned her until recently." "I like to keep some things to myself. Uncommon, coming from a man who once emailed me a spreadsheet with his shopping list." Laughter echoed around the table. Emma took a sip of water, forcing herself to relax. Then, in a moment of spontaneous inspiration, or perhaps desperation, she leaned toward Alexander and whispered loudly enough for the table to hear, "Did you reorganize my spice rack again?" He turned, feigning innocence. "You can't have thyme next to saffron. It's chaos." "It's my chaos. You're a chef. I'm trying to help. You're trying to control me. You put cinnamon in the savory section. Because I use it on roast meat." The table erupted in laughter. Even Victoria laughed, just a little. Emma leaned back, a spark of pride in her chest. That improvised, ridiculous moment had worked. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was acting. After dessert, lavender creme brulee that made Emma raise an impressed eyebrow at the chef, Victoria toasted with her glass. "One last question, Emma," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "If you had to choose between your relationship and your culinary career, which would you choose?" The room fell silent. Even the waiters stopped. Emma met Victoria's gaze, unwavering. "Someone who truly loves me," she said, "would never make me choose." There was silence. Then slowly a single nod from Clarissa, and Alexander no longer looked at Emma as a fake fiancé. He looked at her like a man seeing something real for the first time. But even as the tension in the room dissipated, something else chilled the air. Victoria's smile. He hadn't wavered, but behind her calm a storm was brewing, and Emma knew the real test hadn't ended. It was just beginning. The morning light spilled through the expansive windows of Alexander's apartment, casting long golden stripes across the hardwood floors. Emma sat at the edge of a suede ottoman, barefoot, robe cinched at the waist, sipping coffee that tasted far too expensive for her usual standards. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was full, like something unspoken had begun to settle between their rehearsed lines. She hadn't slept well. Her mind kept replaying the dinner, the performance, the barely concealed smirks from Victoria, the glint in Clarissa's eyes, and that one moment, Alexander's gaze, when she spoke about love and dreams. That look had haunted her all night. Now she had to prepare for another round. Today Victoria had extended an invitation for a private luncheon at the Langford estate, just the 3 of us. Which, Emma understood, was code for interrogation without witnesses. I can't wear the same dress, Emma said, setting down the coffee cup. It would scream, "This is all I own." You don't have to, Alexander replied, standing near the bar counter. He handed her a key card. Bloomingdale's. I made arrangements. Someone will meet you. Emma blinked. You're sending me shopping? I'm investing in the illusion, he said, though his voice held more softness than sarcasm. And in you looking like the woman Victoria can't destroy. She hesitated. So you don't think I can handle her as I am? His expression shifted. I think you can handle anything, but she plays a different kind of game, one that judges books solely by their covers. You deserve armor. An hour later, Emma stepped into a private suite on the top floor of Bloomingdale's, where a team of stylists awaited her. The space was warm and opulent, with soft music playing and racks of gowns arranged like an art installation. The lead stylist, a man named Jordan, greeted her with delight. Darling, we've got 6 hours to turn Cinderella into a queen. Emma laughed, half in nerves, half in surrender. Just don't make me look like someone I'm not. Jordan's eyes gleamed. Honey, my job is to reveal who you are under all that self-doubt. And reveal, they did. They started with the hair. Her unruly curls were tamed into a low chignon, with a few delicate strands left loose to soften her jaw. Her makeup was subtle but transformative. Bronze tones to highlight her cheekbones, a muted rose on her lips, a touch of shimmer in the corner of her eyes. Then came the dress. Midnight blue. Off-shoulder. Silk that draped like water, catching light with every movement. The fabric hugged her curves in a way that was elegant, not loud, timeless, not trendy. A single diamond necklace was added, not flashy, but bold enough to whisper class. When Emma looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because she was hidden, but because, for the first time, she saw a version of herself that was allowed to take up space. When she returned to Alexander's apartment, he stood by the kitchen island, thumbing through his phone. He looked up as she entered and froze. The silence stretched long. His phone slipped from his hand onto the counter. Emma clutched her clutch tighter, suddenly unsure. Too much? He took a slow step forward, then another. His eyes never left hers. No, he said, his voice low. Not even close. He reached out and gently tucked one of the loose strands behind her ear. The touch lingered longer than it should have. His thumb grazed her cheek, as if to confirm she was real. It's not just the dress, he whispered. It's you. Emma swallowed hard. I'm still the same mess of a chef underneath. Good, he said. That's the part I like most. Her heart fluttered unexpectedly, like a violin string pulled too tight. They stood there in stillness, neither daring to move, until the car honked below. The drive to the Langford estate was quiet, but something had changed. They no longer rehearsed lines. There was no need. The performance had been replaced by an energy that needed no script. Subtle glances, shared breath, the occasional touch that lingered too long. As they arrived, Victoria stood on the steps, flanked by fresh roses and perfectly trimmed hedges, sipping a mimosa like it was a weapon. Emma took Alexander's arm. I'm ready, she whispered. He looked at her, something fierce in his gaze. You're more than ready. But neither of them realized. The transformation had done more than prepare Emma for battle. It had triggered something deeper. In him, in her, in them. And Victoria was watching every second of it. The Langford estate that evening was a symphony of wealth and precision. Grand chandeliers cast golden halos across vaulted ceilings, the scent of gardenias drifted from carefully arranged centerpieces, and a string quartet played Vivaldi in the background, like a heartbeat too calm for the tension it veiled. Emma stepped out of the car with practiced grace, her hand still wrapped around Alexander's arm, her midnight blue gown flowing like spilled ink down the marble steps. Every detail had been curated to perfection, but she knew this wasn't just a dinner. It was a performance, it was war. Victoria Langford greeted them at the entrance with a smile so precise it could slice through stone. She wore pearls like armor and extended a hand that trembled with none of the warmth it pretended to hold. Emma, she said, you look elevated. Emma accepted the compliment with a nod. Thank you. I figured dinner with royalty deserved the effort. Victoria's eyes flickered. The drawing room was filled with power players. Investors, socialites, and board members in silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Conversations floated like clouds, light and hollow, filled with references to hedge funds, gallery acquisitions, and summer estates. Emma moved through the room like a guest in a foreign land, but Alexander never let go of her hand, and somehow his presence grounded her. Clarissa stood near the fireplace, a champagne flute in hand, surrounded by men hanging on to her every word. When she saw Emma and Alexander, she excused herself and approached with a calm smile. "You clean up well," Clarissa said to Emma, tone unreadable. Emma smiled, not flinching. "You must have a great tailor. I borrowed your family's elegance." Clarissa raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. Touché. Dinner was announced. A long imperial table stretched across the dining room, covered in crisp white linen and gold-trimmed china. Each place card was handwritten. Emma's was next to Victoria's. Of course. The meal began with poached pear salad and evolved into roasted duck with black cherry reduction. Emma, ever the chef, couldn't help noticing the perfect balance of acid and fat, the attention to plate architecture. But she remained quiet, letting others speak first, observing the rhythm of conversation like a seasoned performer waiting for her cue. Then came the questions. "So, Emma," said one of the Langford cousins across the table, swirling his wine. "You're a chef, right? Where do you work?" Emma smiled. "Currently at 11 Madison Park. I start next week, but my roots are in small kitchens." "Ambitious," Victoria murmured, slicing her duck with surgical precision. "Balancing a culinary career with a serious relationship, it's rare." "It's challenging," Emma agreed, "but not impossible, especially with the right partner." She glanced at Alexander, who didn't need to fake the soft smile that followed. "And how did the two of you meet again?" Victoria asked, spearing a carrot without looking up. "At the Green Market," Alexander said smoothly, "fighting over basil." Emma chuckled. "He thought he could outcook me." "And did he?" Clarissa asked, her tone light. Emma leaned in, smirking. "He tried to flambe risotto." Laughter erupted around the table. Even Victoria's lips twitched. The wine kept flowing, and the atmosphere warmed. Emma found herself slipping into the role more easily, trading jabs with the cousins, laughing at Alexander's exaggerated tales of their first date, defending her preference for keeping cinnamon in the savory section of her spice rack. And then she saw it. Victoria wasn't laughing. She was watching, every moment, every glance, every touch between Emma and Alexander. And then came the strike. "So, Emma," Victoria began, setting her fork down, her tone honeyed. "If Alexander were to receive an offer to expand his restaurant to Tokyo or Paris, but it required him to leave New York indefinitely, would you go with him? Or would your career come first?" Emma felt the silence before she heard it. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations hushed. She placed her napkin gently on the table, then looked Victoria in the eye. "I believe love doesn't demand sacrifice. It demands support. If someone truly loves me, they won't ask me to choose between them and my dreams. They'll find a way to grow with me." Her voice was calm, her heart racing. Victoria's gaze didn't flicker, but Clarissa smiled. "Well said," murmured someone down the table. Alexander reached for her hand beneath the tablecloth. He didn't squeeze, he just held it, firm, silent, present. Dessert arrived, chilled chocolate soufflé with raspberry coulis. Emma barely tasted it. After dinner, while the guests dispersed into the parlors and balconies, Victoria pulled Alexander aside. Emma could see them near the French doors, their silhouettes backlit by the garden lights. Victoria's posture was sharp, her hand firm on his forearm. She was whispering something important. Alexander's face remained unreadable. Emma wandered into the parlor alone, suddenly aware of how much of her life had shifted in mere days. She wasn't sure what this was anymore, a game, a favor, a fantasy that had slipped too far into reality. She stepped out onto the balcony to clear her head. The night air was cool against her skin. She let out a long breath. Then, behind her, the door creaked open. She didn't have to turn to know it was him. "I didn't tell you this earlier," Alexander said softly, "but Victoria doesn't test people for no reason. If she thinks you passed, it means she's scared." Emma turned, her eyes searching his. "Scared of what?" He looked at her for a long moment, his voice quiet. That this isn't pretend anymore. And just like that, the lines between performance and reality blurred again. This time, more than either of them expected. The following morning, a faint drizzle fell over Manhattan, coating the sidewalks with a silver sheen. Emma stood at the window of Alexander's penthouse, wrapped in one of his oversized shirts, watching the rain slide down the glass like slow tears. The city never stopped moving, but something inside her had. The dinner had been a success on the surface. She'd said all the right things, worn all the right clothes, held all the right smiles. But underneath it all, she felt like a puzzle with two missing pieces, what this thing between her and Alexander truly was, and what Victoria's next move would be. She didn't have to wait long. By noon, a black car arrived downstairs. The driver handed Alexander an envelope sealed with the Langford family crest. No return address, no note, just a single card. Lunch. Today. Just Emma and me. Emma read it twice. "Are you sure this isn't an invitation to be politely assassinated?" she asked, half joking. Alexander's jaw tightened. "You don't have to go." But Emma shook her head. "I do. Because if she was going to keep playing this part, she needed to understand the woman writing the script. Victoria Langford chose the kind of restaurant where no music played, the silverware was antique, and the waitstaff moved like shadows. Emma arrived in a black sheath dress and heels that made her walk taller than she felt. Her reflection in the mirrored elevator looked composed, confident, but inside she was coiled like wire. Victoria stood as she approached. "You're punctual," she said. "I'm a chef," Emma replied. "Time matters." They sat. The waiter poured water. No menus were offered. Victoria had pre-selected the meal. A silent power play. "I won't waste your time," Victoria began, folding her napkin. "You're not a fool, Emma, and I don't think you're in this for Alexander's money." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Thank you, I think." "I've seen women like you before," Victoria continued. "Bright, independent, passionate, but they always reach a point where they must choose love or ambition, and I want to know right now, if that moment came, what would you choose?" The question sat between them like a loaded pistol. Emma sipped her water. "Why are you asking me that?" "Because I don't want Alexander distracted. He's rebuilding his business. He's finally focused. If you derail that, I will remove you." Emma didn't flinch. "And if I help him rise?" Victoria smiled, but it was a cold expression. "You can't do both." Emma leaned forward. "I think you're wrong." Victoria blinked just once. "I think people can be in love and ambitious. I think two strong individuals can make each other stronger," Emma said. "I don't want to clip his wings, and I won't let anyone clip mine either." The waiter arrived with the first course, salmon crudo with fennel and citrus. Neither woman touched it. "I have a job interview tomorrow," Emma added. "At 11 Madison Park. If I get it, I'll work 10-hour shifts, late nights, weekends. I won't always be available to pose for Langford family photo ops." "Then why pretend to be his fiancée?" Victoria asked. Emma paused. "Because at the time I thought it was harmless. But now," she exhaled, "now I don't know where the act ends and the truth begins. And maybe that's exactly what scares you." Victoria didn't respond right away. Her hands remained folded, her eyes calculating. "You're smarter than you look," she finally said. Emma smiled. "That's usually how I win." They ate in silence for the rest of the meal. When dessert arrived, a bitter chocolate torte, Victoria finally spoke again. "If I see you hurting him, I will end it." No hesitation. Emma met her gaze. "Understood. But if I see you doing the same, so will I." The check was already paid. No one hugged. No one shook hands. But as Emma stepped outside into the still drizzling afternoon, something had changed. Victoria hadn't won, and Emma hadn't backed down. She walked 2 blocks in silence before realizing her phone had buzzed. It was a message from Alexander. "Are you okay?" She stared at the screen for a long time, then replied, still deciding. Because truthfully, she didn't know what this was anymore. She didn't know what she was to him or what he was to her, only that something real was starting to form in the ashes of a lie. And now, with her interview looming and Victoria watching from the shadows, It was only a matter of time before everything was tested. For real. The morning of the interview arrived wrapped in nerves and clouds. Emma stood in front of the mirror, tying her hair back into a low bun with trembling fingers. Her apron, freshly pressed, her knives polished and lined up inside their leather case like old soldiers called back to war. And her heart, loud, defiant, ready. She arrived at 11 Madison Park, 15 minutes early. The facade of the restaurant, modern and discreet, loomed like a temple of culinary prestige. It was the kind of place where ingredients were whispered like poetry and silence spoke louder than applause. Inside, the reception was understated. Sleek counters, subtle lighting, and the faint scent of bergamot in the air. A young hostess offered her a cup of mint tea while she waited. Emma sat straight, palms flat against her thighs, rehearsing everything, knife techniques, flavor pairings, her own worth. Finally, the door opened. "Emma Reynolds?" a voice called. She stood. The man who greeted her was none other than Chef Grant Achatz himself, one of her heroes. His reputation was one of genius and exacting standards. He extended a hand, firm but brief. "I read your resume," he said without flourish, "and I've tasted your raspberry compote." Emma's eyes widened. "You have." It exploded in my lobby. Took that as a sign. She flushed, remembering the hotel chaos. "Sorry about that." "Don't be, it was good." He led her to a pristine test kitchen, stainless steel counters, bright overhead lights, and a single station prepared for one chef. On the counter sat a basket of ingredients: heirloom carrots, fennel, ginger, lemongrass, cream, a pomegranate, and edible flowers. "You have 90 minutes, Grant said. "Create a dish that tells us who you are." And just like that, he walked out, leaving her alone. Emma stared at the ingredients. No meat, no protein, no obvious center. Just roots, color, and contrast. She took a breath, grounding herself. No time for second-guessing. She started with the carrots, roasting them with fennel in a light glaze of pomegranate reduction. She created a ginger lemongrass foam using reverse spherification, balancing acidity with a cream emulsion that danced between savory and floral. The edible flowers were used sparingly, delicate, intentional. She plated the dish on slate, precise, elegant, and deeply hers. Halfway through, 2 sous chefs entered and watched silently. Then another chef. Then Grant. Nobody spoke. Emma's hands moved like instinct, fast, clean, purposeful. When she presented the final plate, she said only one thing. "This is called rooted grace. It's everything I was raised to believe food should be: humble ingredients elevated with intention." The judges tasted, and for several seconds they said nothing. Then Grant set his fork down. "You don't just understand technique," he said. "You understand restraint." Emma held her breath. He continued, "We don't usually make offers on the spot, but you're not usual." Her heart stuttered. "You'll begin a trial period starting Monday, 3 p.m. sharp." Emma blinked. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "We'll see," he replied with a faint smile. Talent only matters if you can hold it under fire. When she stepped back out into the street, the drizzle had stopped. The sky was still gray, but the city looked different, softer somehow. Her phone buzzed. "Alexander." "How'd it go?" Emma stared at the screen. What was she supposed to say? That she'd just cracked open a dream she was afraid to even name? That part of her wanted to run straight to him and celebrate like they were something real? Instead, she texted back, "Let's just say you'll need to learn how to cook for one." 5 seconds later, he called. "Wait," he said as soon as she answered. "Does that mean what I think it means?" Emma laughed, the sound surprising even herself. "I got it." There was silence on the other end. Then, "I knew you would." The warmth in his voice was something she hadn't expected. It wasn't pride from a partner in crime. It was something more, something deeper. "I want to see you," he said. Emma hesitated. "I thought we agreed to take things slow, figure out what's real." "I know," he said. I think I already do." She closed her eyes, leaning against the stone facade of the building. "Meet me at the zoo," she whispered. "The zoo?" Central Park, 1 hour, penguins only, he laughed. You're the strangest woman I've ever met. And you're still here, she said. Of course I am. But Emma had no idea what she'd find at that zoo. A fake romance that had somehow become a real friendship? Or something more terrifying and beautiful than either of them had planned? Only time would tell. The penguin exhibit at Central Park Zoo was nearly empty when Emma arrived, except for a father with twin toddlers squealing at the glass and a couple quietly arguing in Spanish near the snack stand. She found herself grateful for the quiet. It felt like the city had briefly paused just for her. She stood near the edge of the viewing glass, arms crossed, watching the tuxedoed creatures waddle with awkward dignity across the rocks. There was something comforting about them, out of place on land, but elegant once they hit the water, like they knew their worth in the right environment. You weren't kidding, came a voice behind her. Penguins only. Emma turned and saw Alexander approaching, his coat collar turned up against the wind, a paper cup of coffee in each hand. He handed her one, and for a moment neither said anything. Just two people staring at Arctic birds, trying to decode the story they'd written together. I used to come here as a kid, she said. My mum would save coins in a glass jar labeled Zoo Day. We'd take the subway and make a whole afternoon of it. It was our thing. Alexander smiled softly. I love that. Emma sipped her coffee. She always said the penguins reminded her of me. Because of your sense of style, she laughed. Because I never felt like I fit in anywhere, but I was oddly determined to keep moving forward anyway. He didn't respond right away, just looked at her with something warm behind his eyes, something deeper than curiosity. Respect, maybe. Admiration. And now? He asked. Do you still feel out of place? Emma shrugged. Less than I did yesterday, but more than I'd like. There was silence between them, but it wasn't heavy, it was honest. I thought the interview would be the scariest part of this week, she continued. Turns out, pretending to be in love with someone is harder. Alexander tilted his head. Harder than actually falling, she blinked. Is that what you think this is? I don't know, he said. I just know that when I'm around you, I forget we're pretending. His voice was low, steady, but edged with something fragile, like he was revealing a truth he hadn't planned to say out loud. Emma looked away, her eyes following the slow dive of a penguin into the water. I'm scared of messing this up. This? He repeated. She turned back to him. Whatever this is. I've worked so hard to build something real for myself. This job, this city, this new life, it's all I have. If I fall for someone now, if it's not real, it'll break more than just my heart. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him through her coat. I'm not asking you to fall, he said. I'm asking you to stand next to me, and we figure it out from there. Emma blinked, her throat tight. You're good at this, she whispered. I'm not, he replied. But I'm good at seeing when something matters, and this, it does. He reached for her hand, not for show, not for a lie, but because it felt natural. Her fingers closed around his. They stood in silence again, watching the penguins slide through the water like they belonged there, as if clumsiness could evolve into grace in the right moment, in the right place, with the right person. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. You know, she said, penguins mate for life. Alexander chuckled. Is this your way of locking me in? It's my way of saying I don't fake things that matter. He turned to look at her, and in that one glance, everything that had once been scripted now pulsed with something raw and alive. But before either of them could say what they were both thinking, Emma's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, read the message, and froze. What is it? Alexander asked, his voice suddenly alert. Emma looked at him, the lightness in her chest evaporating. It's Victoria, she said slowly. She wants to meet. Tonight. Alone. Alexander's expression darkened. Did she say why? Emma shook her head. No, but I think she knows. He took a deep breath. Then we stopped lying. But the question lingered in Emma's mind like a shadow at the edge of light. Would the truth be enough to save what they'd built? Or would it be the very thing that tore it down? The storm broke just after sunset. Not in the sky, though the clouds were thick and low over Manhattan, but inside the polished, candlelit elegance of Alexander Hart's restaurant, Hart & Co., where every table was full and every guest blissfully unaware of the tempest about to unfold behind the scenes. Emma arrived through the staff entrance, having just finished her onboarding session at 11 Madison Park. She still had flour dusted on her apron, her hair twisted into a messy knot, her body buzzing from the thrill of having officially stepped into the job she'd fought so hard for. She hadn't even seen Alexander yet, only texted him a playful, "Guess who finally has a locker with her name on it?" She was heading toward the back office when the maitre d' intercepted her with wide eyes. "Ms. Langford is here." Emma froze. "Victoria?" He nodded. "She's in the private room. Asked for Mr. Hart. Alone." Emma didn't hesitate. She walked straight past the kitchens, past the glass wine wall, and into the side hall where the private dining room was located. The door was cracked open. Inside, Victoria Langford sat at the head of the table, a leather-bound portfolio in front of her, a single flute of untouched champagne at her side. She didn't look up when Emma entered. "I asked for Alexander," she said flatly. Emma closed the door behind her. "And you got me." Only then did Victoria lift her gaze. Cold, composed, and burning with something sharp. "I know everything," she said, "from the beginning." Emma didn't blink. "Then I assume you know the part where we didn't plan for this to happen." Victoria opened the portfolio and slid it across the table. Inside were photographs, grainy security stills, timestamps, hotel entrance logs. One image showed Emma standing outside the Astoria with her suitcase split open. Another showed Alexander reaching for her hand. And another, more recent, captured them laughing in the Bloomingdale's dressing suite. "You started dating the day of my dinner," Victoria said, voice like cracked ice. "That's not love, that's theater." Emma took a deep breath. It was theater, at first. And now? Now it's real. Victoria's laugh was small and bitter. "Do you expect me to believe that?" "I don't care if you believe it," Emma replied. "It doesn't make it less true." Victoria stood. "You don't understand what's at stake. Alexander's restaurant exists because of my investment. I could pull it all tonight, leave him in ruins." "Then do it," Emma said, surprising even herself with the steel in her voice. "If that's who you are." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Don't play moral high ground with me, you lied." Emma stepped forward. "Yes, and so did he. And we both got caught in something that went way too far. But somewhere between the script and the reality, something real started growing. Something I didn't expect. And maybe you didn't either." Victoria's jaw tightened. Emma softened just slightly. "You think you're protecting him, but you're only punishing him for making a choice you don't approve of. And if you destroy what he's built to prove a point, what does that say about you?" There was silence. Long. Loaded. Then the door opened. Alexander stepped in, eyes moving between them. "What's going on?" Victoria didn't turn to him. "She already knows," Emma said quietly. "She has everything." Alexander stepped beside Emma. "Then she also knows we weren't pretending last night, or the night before that." Victoria finally looked at him, her face unreadable. "You're making a mistake." "No," he said. "I've made a lot of those. That's the first real thing I've had in years." Victoria stared at them both. Then slowly, she closed the portfolio. "You'll be hearing from my lawyers." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking like a metronome, counting down the end of something. The room fell silent. Alexander looked at Emma, his face pale. "She's going to pull everything," he whispered. Emma didn't speak. She reached for his hand. "I know," she said. They stood there, still and scared and stubbornly together. Outside, the rain finally started to fall, heavy, cleansing. But just as the storm reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The door opened again, and there, framed in the doorway, stood Clarissa Langford, her expression unreadable. "I heard everything," she said, "and it's time someone else in this family said something honest." Clarissa Langford stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, shoulders poised, arms crossed, a Langford to the bone. But her eyes, softer than her mother's and far more honest, flicked between Emma and Alexander, with a focus that sent a quiet current through the room. "I heard everything," she repeated, stepping inside. "And I think it's time someone told the truth." Victoria had barely exited the building, but her presence still lingered like a storm cloud. The file folder sat unopened on the table again, evidence that no longer needed explaining. Alexander spoke first. "Clarissa, this isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," she said. "It always was." Emma remained quiet, watching as Clarissa walked slowly toward the table, her heels echoing in the silence. She wasn't dressed for battle. No Langford pearls, no designer armor. Just a simple blouse and a look of conviction. "You know why my mother hated the idea of you being with someone like Emma?" she asked Alexander. "Because it reminds her of everything she couldn't control in her own life, including me." Alexander blinked. "Clarissa? No. Let me talk." She looked at Emma. "I've watched my mother manipulate everything in her orbit. She doesn't believe in love. She believes in image, alliances, power. And I let her push me into a relationship with Alexander because it looked good on paper. Because we were the right age, the right background, the right narrative." She turned back to Alexander. "But you and I both know we were never real." Alexander nodded slowly. "I always respected you, but no, we weren't." "And that's okay," Clarissa said, "because what I see now between you and her is real, flawed, messy, unscripted, but real." Emma didn't know what to say. She hadn't expected support from Clarissa, hadn't even considered it a possibility. And yet here she was, defying a legacy. Clarissa reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document. "This is a copy of the investment contract my mother signed with you, Alex. I had a lawyer look at it. There's no clause that allows her to demand repayment based on personal misconduct." Alexander frowned. "She said she bluffed. She counted on you panicking, on both of you running." Clarissa placed the paper on the table. "You're protected legally, but emotionally that's up to you." Emma stared at her. "Why are you doing this?" Clarissa's lips lifted in a sad smile. "Because I spent years being the good daughter, the one who didn't make noise, and it got me nothing but a broken engagement and a hollow life. Watching the two of you fight for something, even if it started wrong, it made me realize I still have a voice." She turned to go, then paused in the doorway. "One more thing," she said without turning around. "Don't waste it. Don't let pride or fear get in the way of something real." And with that she disappeared into the corridor, quiet, composed, and more powerful than she'd ever looked before. Later that night, the restaurant emptied out. The candles flickered low, the staff whispered goodbyes, and Emma found herself wiping down a counter just to keep her hands busy. Alexander joined her in the quiet kitchen, sleeves rolled up, tie undone. "She could have stayed quiet," he said. Emma nodded. "But she didn't." He leaned against the counter beside her. "And now we're free." Emma let out a small laugh. "As free as anyone can be after lying to a billionaire matriarch and falling in love by accident." There was silence. Then Alexander said, "Do you regret it?" She looked at him. "Which part?" He hesitated. The lie, or what came after? Emma wiped her hands on a towel and turned to face him fully. "I regret that we had to lie to meet each other, but I don't regret what it became." His shoulders relaxed. "Me neither." He reached for her hand again, not as a performance, not as a defense, but because they were no longer pretending. Emma leaned into him, resting her forehead against his chest. "I think this might be the first time neither of us is acting," she whispered. He held her closer. "So what now?" Emma pulled back just enough to look up at him, her voice barely audible. "Now we find out who we are when no one's watching." But just as their lips met in a kiss that felt like both an ending and a beginning, Emma's phone buzzed. A single message. From Grant Achatz. "Tomorrow. Full kitchen. Let's see what you're really made of." Her dream was calling, and now she'd have to balance it with the man who no longer felt like a stranger, but like home. 6 months passed like pages in a well-worn novel, each one dense with quiet victories, soft mornings, and the slow stitching of two lives once built separately. Emma moved into Alexander's loft on Crosby Street, though she still kept a drawer full of flour-dusted aprons in her old apartment, as if leaving a breadcrumb trail back to the woman she used to be. They were no longer playing parts. There were no more rehearsed stories or strategic appearances, only the clinking of wineglasses at midnight after long shifts, the shuffle of bare feet in the kitchen, the comfortable silence between two people who no longer needed words to be known. Alexander's restaurant, once threatened, was now thriving. Reservations booked weeks in advance, the press hailing it as resurrected with renewed soul. And Emma? She was holding her own at 11 Madison Park. The trial turned into a permanent position. Her plated creations began showing up on the tasting menu, subtle, clever dishes that whispered her name without shouting for credit. But it was the moments in between that defined them. A Saturday spent reorganizing the spice rack again, after Alexander dared to place paprika near the pastry shelf. A Sunday in bed, reading separate books but reaching for each other's hands every few pages. The way Emma brewed his coffee exactly how he liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, because she paid attention. And the way he set aside her favorite spoon before dinner service, because she liked how it felt in her hand. No declarations, just devotion. That's what made the moment so surprising. It was a quiet Wednesday. Rain pressed against the windows like soft drumming, and Emma stood barefoot in the wine cellar, reaching for a bottle of Merlot with a post-it she'd scribbled, "Use me before I turn into vinegar." She was still in her chef's whites, hair tied up, her face flushed from the evening rush. Alexander appeared in the doorway behind her. "Need help?" he asked, voice casual. She turned. "Nope, just grabbing a bottle to go with what I'm about to throw together upstairs, something rustic. Warm. The kind of meal we don't talk during." He stepped closer, pulling something from behind his back. Emma squinted. "Is that—" He held out a small glass jar. Inside was cinnamon. Not store-bought, not labeled. It was hers. The same cinnamon she insisted belonged in the savory section. Emma laughed. "You kept that?" Alexander nodded, then bent down and reached into the pocket of his coat. When he stood up again, he was holding a ring. Simple. No giant diamond. Just a thin band, elegant, honest. Like something made to last. Emma froze, still holding the wine. "Is this a joke?" she whispered. "No." "Then, why now?" He stepped closer. "Because I've spent the last 6 months listening to you talk to your basil like it's a person, and watching you dance in the kitchen when no one's looking. Because you leave the light on for me when I'm late, and you forgive me when I reorder the pantry by accident." He took her free hand. "And because I want to spend the rest of my life arguing with you about cinnamon." Tears welled in her eyes, uninvited and unashamed. "You're serious," she whispered. "I'm dead serious. Marry me, Emma Reynolds. Not because it looks good on paper, or because anyone expects us to, but because this beautiful, chaotic, quiet thing between us is real. And I don't want it to end." She set the wine bottle down gently, then the spoon, then the towel on her shoulder, and finally she cupped his face in her hands and whispered, "Yes." Later that night, she lay in bed with her head on his chest, the ring resting lightly on her finger like it had always been there. Outside, the rain kept falling, but inside, it felt like spring. Emma didn't dream of her mother's glass jar anymore. She didn't need it. She had found what she was saving for. And what surprised her most wasn't the proposal. It was that, after everything, she said yes without fear. But even then, as she drifted into sleep, one thought lingered. If the beginning was born of a lie, and the middle built through risk, then what kind of truth would the future hold? Autumn arrived quietly in Manhattan, brushing the trees in Central Park with amber strokes, and wrapping the city in the scent of roasted chestnuts and cool wind. The pace of the streets never slowed, but inside the life Emma and Alexander had built together, there was a different rhythm now. Steady, intentional, real. They no longer felt like two separate people moving toward the same dream. They were the dream. Emma's mornings began before the sun, hair tied back, knives in hand, the kitchen at 11 Madison Park, humming like a second heartbeat. She had earned her place not through charm or story, but through skill and grace under pressure. She had become not just part of the team, but part of its soul. Her dishes were featured, her instincts trusted, her voice finally carried weight. Alexander, on the other hand, had evolved too. Heart & Co. was no longer just a restaurant. It was a space with warmth, memory, and character. He replaced one of the chandeliers with copper pendant lights because Emma said they felt like home. He built a small herb garden on the rooftop, just because she once mentioned missing the smell of fresh thyme in the morning. They weren't trying to impress each other anymore. They were building together. Sunday nights became sacred. No phones, no reservations, just a bottle of wine, Ella Fitzgerald in the background, and a tradition they coined no-filter dinners. They talked about everything: dreams, mistakes, the fear of becoming too comfortable, the joy of being safe enough to. One evening, sitting on their fire escape with takeout and wool blankets, Emma looked at the skyline and said, "It's funny, isn't it?" "What is?" Alexander asked, feeding her a bite of noodles. "That it all started with a lie. A ridiculous, impulsive, chaotic lie." He smiled. "Best mistake of my life." She looked at him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't dropped my suitcase that day?" "All the time," he said. "And every time, I come to the same conclusion." "What's that?" "I would have found you anyway." Emma didn't respond. She just leaned her head on his shoulder and let the city buzz around them. There was no big wedding, at least not yet. No press release or Langford headlines. Just a quiet decision to be together, to keep choosing each other every morning, every night. To build a life not defined by grand gestures, but by the consistency of love expressed in small, daily ways. And when the world got loud again, when kitchens got stressful or investors called too late or critics published reviews that cut a little too deep, they returned to what mattered: the laughter in their kitchen, the smell of cinnamon on a lazy Sunday, the way she touched his back when he didn't even realize he needed comfort, the way he looked at her like she was always worth coming home to, because in the end, it wasn't about pretending anymore. It was about belonging. And as they walked together through a golden Central Park, hand in hand, talking about wine pairings and ridiculous baby names for a someday not so far away, Emma smiled to herself and thought, some love stories begin with a kiss. Ours began with a suitcase and a lie, and somehow, thank God, it turned out to be everything I never knew I needed. Some love stories begin with a kiss, others with a lie told in panic, a fake engagement, and a dinner full of strangers. But the most unforgettable ones, they grow in silence, in glances, in the spaces between what's real and what we never dared to believe could be. Emma and Alexander never planned to fall in love. They weren't supposed to care. But somewhere between pretending and protecting each other, they found something worth holding on to, something stronger than fear, stronger than pride. Now tell me, have you ever felt something so real it scared you? Would you have said yes at the end of a lie that turned into love? If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from? Your like helps this channel grow and keeps us bringing more emotional stories like this. Share it with someone special.